May 1798, a massive French invasion force sails across the Mediterranean. 55,000 men crowd more than 300 transports, guarded by 13 ships of the line. On the mighty flagship Orient, General Napoleon Bonaparte leads the expedition. Fresh from victories in Italy, Napoleon is tasked with a new mission. Egypt, jewel of the Ottoman Empire, ancient land of mystery, and key to British trade. France hopes the conquest will cripple Britain's links with India and the East. Trade funds Britain's wars, and Napoleon's triumph would shift the balance of power. To French leaders, the expedition has two more advantages: wealth and Napoleon's absence from Paris. Ambitious and dangerously popular, Bonaparte is safer far from the capital's intrigues. For Napoleon, Egypt is glory and destiny. He dreams of Caesar, of Alexander. But the Mediterranean is dangerous. Britain rules the seas. Admiral Horatio Nelson prowls the waters with 14 ships of the line. Nelson knows the French have sailed, but not where. For now, fortune favors Bonaparte. The French pass undetected. Storms scatter the British. On June 9th, Napoleon arrives at Malta. Once heroic defenders of Christendom, the Knights of St. John collapse in just 2 days. Napoleon reforms their government, seizes supplies, and presses on toward Egypt. Nelson searches, but misses the French fleet by mere miles. At last, on July 1st, Napoleon's army lands at Alexandria. Napoleon's army lands in Egypt, kicking off his most audacious campaign. But can his forces prevail against the might of the British Empire? Will Napoleon rewrite history or meet his match in the deserts of Egypt? Will he live or die in battle? Find out next time. As soon as Napoleon took power in France, he set about modernizing the army. Under his leadership, it grew from 300,000 to 600,000 men, making it one of the largest in Europe. It was an army ready for conquest, and conquer they did. By 1797, French troops had seized vast territories across the continent. But Napoleon wasn't satisfied. He dreamed of more. His gaze turned to the riches of the Ottoman Empire. In particular, he coveted Egypt. Control of the Suez Canal would give France dominance over lucrative trade routes to Asia. Plus, it would keep an eye on the British. Britain and France had been at war since 1793. Napoleon hoped to cut Britain's lifeline to India. If successful, this campaign would be a coup de grace to the British. But Napoleon's ambitions were not universally shared. Many advisors opposed the Egyptian campaign. They preferred securing France's position in Europe before expanding overseas. But Napoleon was undeterred. With characteristic bravado, he declared, "There are no obstacles that cannot be overcome, no dangers that cannot be avoided." And so, in May 1798, Napoleon set sail with 55,000 troops and 13 warships. It was the largest naval and military expedition in European history. The journey was fraught with peril. Storms and high winds threatened to derail the mission. But Napoleon's fleet pressed on, guided by the brilliant navigation of Pierre-André Latour. On June 11th, they arrived at the island of Malta. Napoleon hoped the local Knights of St. John would resist the British, but they didn't. The Knights had already surrendered to the British 4 days earlier. Undeterred, Napoleon spent 2 days reforming the Knights' government, seizing their supplies, then set sail for Egypt. Meanwhile, British Admiral Horatio Nelson was hot on Napoleon's trail. He had received intelligence about the French fleet and was determined to intercept them. But despite being only 40 miles away, Nelson never spotted the French. Napoleon's fleet slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. Finally, On July, Napoleon's ships arrived off the coast of Alexandria. After a brief stop, Napoleon began unloading troops and supplies. 2 days later, his army was ready to march. Napoleon divided his forces into 3 corps. He placed his brother Joseph in command of the first, General Kleber leading the second, and General Menou heading the third. The bulk of the artillery and supplies followed General Menou's corps. It was a huge undertaking, and the long marches exhausted both men and animals. Nevertheless, they pushed on, eager to claim victory for France. As the French advanced, word spread of their leader's reputation. Peasants and soldiers alike flocked to Napoleon's banner, hoping for freedom from Ottoman rule. It seemed the campaign was going well. But what of the British? Would they stand idly by while France seized Egyptian riches? The answer came swiftly. Within weeks of Napoleon's arrival, British troops began landing along the Nile. The stage was set for a showdown between 2 great powers. Each side prepared for battle, knowing that the outcome could change the course of history. Who will prevail in this clash of titans? Will it be Napoleon with his ambitious plans for conquest, or the British with their vast colonial experience? 5,000 men stormed the city and quickly overpowered its tiny garrison. Soon, 38,000 French veterans were marching inland. Among them, Murat Lannes, Marmont, Berthier, and General Dumas, France's first black general. With them also traveled 167 scientists and artists, the Commission of Arts and Sciences. But Alexandria was a disappointment. Once a city of lights, it was now a crumbling town of dirty bazaars and fetid slums. Egypt was ruled not by the Sultan, but by Mamluk warlords who kept him as a puppet. Murad Bey and Ibrahim Bey commanded fearsome cavalry and ruled Egypt with cruelty. Napoleon proclaimed, "I come to restore your rights. I revere Allah and the Quran." The Mamluks had seized power in Egypt in 1798. Now they rallied at Cairo and summoned all able warriors to defend their master and their country. Napoleon marched at once, ignoring the pleas of his exhausted troops. He misjudged the heat and the desert. Thirst tormented his men. Hundreds died. Bedouins harassed the stragglers and executed the captives. At last, on July 1801, the French reached water at Tamana. But Murad Bey advanced with his cavalry to cut off their supply. On the banks of the Nile at Shubrikit, 4,000 Mamluks charged. They glittered with gold and jewels, brandishing sabers and pistols. It was July 1801, and Napoleon faced an elite enemy. The Mamluks were the finest horsemen in the world. For 3 centuries, they had dominated Egypt, ruling as military dictators and waging jihad against the infidels. Every spring, the Ottoman Sultan sent new regiments of Janissaries to bolster the Sultan's forces in Egypt. But many of these reinforcements deserted and joined the Mamluk ranks. Napoleon formed giant infantry squares, a protective formation that allowed common soldiers to stand toe-to-toe with the most elite cavalry in the world. The cavalry crashed against walls of bayonets and musket fire. Again and again they charged, screaming the praises of Allah. But after hours of fighting, the Mamluks finally retreated, leaving 1,000 dead on the field. The French lost barely a man. That night, Napoleon wrote, "A battle such as this does not disgrace a whole campaign. I am satisfied with my soldiers." Though victorious, Napoleon realized he could not defeat the wily Egyptian horsemen in the open field. He needed to find them, to force them into tight quarters where their numbers and mobility would count for less. And so he set out to crush the Mamluks in the streets of Cairo. The Egyptian campaign was one of the longest and hardest fought of Napoleon's career. Exhausted, demoralized, and dying of thirst, His troops longed for the comforts of home, but the desert offered no quarter. The searing sun beat down on his men, turning their uniforms into heavy, wet blankets. Within days, their skin was peeling and blistered. Then the flies came, attracted by the stench of sweat and urine. Men slapped, hacked, and burned, but the insects only seemed to thrive in the filth. One by one, the columns staggered into the Egyptian capital. It looked like any provincial town, a handful of mud, brick, and stone buildings surrounding a square, a mosque, and covered bazaar. Napoleon rode through the gates on a white horse, General Dumas at his side. The soldiers following them had been on the march for months, their bodies emaciated by hunger and thirst. They clutched their rifles like old, faithful dogs. Some had to be carried in stretchers. Many had lost their minds. But when they saw the riches of the Egyptian bazaars, some cried out, "Look, there is our ransom." Others, "There is our fortune." But their joy was short-lived. Napoleon had come to fight, and plundering the city was forbidden. The treasures of the bazaar were not for the taking. The officers knew what they had to do if they wanted plunder. They would have to seize it from the Egyptians. And so that night, as the moon climbed high in the sky, the soldiers fanned out across the city. They burst into homes and shops, stealing money, jewels, and fine clothes. The cries of startled families echoed in the narrow streets. By the next morning, the French had taken Cairo. Napoleon had defeated the Mamluk cavalry, and his men were rich. He had come to Egypt to conquer a city, but he ended up conquering an empire. Days later, the armies clashed near Cairo beside the pyramids. Napoleon arrayed 25,000 men in squares, artillery at the corners. Murad Bey commanded 6,000 elite cavalry. They charged again and again, cut down by volleys of fire. French troops stormed Imbaba, the Mamluk stronghold. Thousands drowned fleeing into the Nile. In 2 hours, the Mamluk army was broken. Napoleon named it the Battle of the Pyramids. On July 24th, he entered Cairo in triumph. But destiny shifted at sea. On August 1st, Nelson found the French fleet at Aboukir Bay. Outnumbered, he attacked without hesitation. By nightfall, 11 French ships were destroyed or captured. The Orient exploded in a fireball seen for miles. 3,000 French prisoners, their fleet annihilated. Napoleon was stranded in Egypt, cut off from France. The year is 1798. Napoleon Bonaparte is perhaps the greatest military leader in history. Victories against the Austrians, the Dutch, and the Prussians have made him famous. And now he's in Egypt, having just defeated the Ottoman Empire. His next objective is to take over the whole country. But there's a problem. There's a British naval force there led by Admiral Horatio Nelson. So Napoleon does something crazy. He ignores the navy and heads straight for Cairo. The capital is defended by thousands of elite cavalrymen called the Men. They're mounted on superb horses, and they attack in large groups, wave after wave. It looks like an unstoppable force. But Napoleon has a trick up his sleeve. Instead of attacking the horsemen directly, he waits until the last minute and then lets loose with cannons from every corner. The effect is devastating. Thousands of horsemen are cut down. The survivors flee into the Nile River, where most of them drown. Only 6,000 make it across the river to the other side. For Napoleon, it's the easiest battle of his life. He loses only 500 men, while inflicting at least 10,000 casualties on the enemy. Napoleon sends one of his staff members back to France with dispatches announcing his victory. Then he takes a little boat and sails down the Nile to Alexandria. There he boards a ship bound for France, sure that his glory is assured. But the staff member carrying the dispatches is too slow. Napoleon's fleet is spotted first. British sailors see the French ships sailing toward Aboukir Bay. They send a message to Admiral Nelson, who's 600 kilometers away. Nelson immediately sets sail with 18 ships, including his flagship, the Vanguard. He reaches Aboukir Bay just as the French fleet is dropping anchor. Napoleon's fleet is larger, but Nelson doesn't care. He orders his ships to attack. The sailors on the French ships are mostly green recruits, conscripted farmers and laborers. They haven't even finished unloading the cargo. The French fleet is caught completely by surprise. One by one, Nelson's ships engage the French vessels. One by one, they're destroyed. Soon, huge flames light up the night sky. One of Nelson's ships, the Alexander, fires a red-hot musket ball. It lands on the deck of the French flagship, the Orient. The Orient explodes in a huge fireball. Smoke rises for miles into the air. Of the 117 ships in Napoleon's fleet, 18 are captured and 68 are destroyed. 3,000 French sailors are killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. Napoleon's dream of invading France is over. He's stranded in Egypt. In spite of his stunning defeat at sea, Napoleon is still popular in Egypt. He's been portrayed as a liberator, a bringer of modern ideas, and a fighter against oppressive religious authority. When Napoleon arrived, he had proclaimed himself the protector of the Egyptian people. Now he needs their help to get home. At first, the Egyptians enthusiastically support the French. They swarm the streets waving French flags. But many of them are soon disillusioned. As the weeks pass, Napoleon becomes increasingly desperate. He founds schools and institutes hospitals. He issues proclamations praising Islam and funds the construction of mosques. He even cultivates the friendship of local leaders and religious figures. Slowly, the Egyptians come to accept him, but not as a liberator, just as another foreign conqueror. Most of them still see the French as invaders. In Cairo, revolt erupts. Bands of angry Egyptians roam the city, attacking anyone who supports the French. Shops owned by French sympathizers are ransacked and destroyed. It's clear to Napoleon that he can't stay in Egypt. He leaves Cairo and begins his long journey home. A few months later, he reaches Paris, a changed man. No longer the brash young general, he's now a disillusioned, cynical veteran. His Egyptian campaign is considered a failure. Yet strangely, it wasn't a total loss. While he was gone, France had been taken over by a group of royalist reactionaries. Napoleon wasted no time in overthrowing them. Within a year, he had become the first consul of France, the most powerful man in the country. His Egyptian adventure may have failed, but it launched him on a new path. A path that would lead him to the very top of Europe and change the course of history forever. Barricades rose. Governor Dupuy was killed. French troops crushed the rebellion with brutal force. Thousands of Egyptians died. Napoleon pardoned the leaders, but ordered all armed rebels executed. Egypt remained restless. Meanwhile, plague spread through the French army. Supplies dwindled. Soldiers grew desperate. But in Upper Egypt, Dessex defeated Murad Bey's forces in battle. Still, Napoleon sensed danger ahead. The Sultan had declared holy war. Ottoman armies were massing in Syria. And so, in February 1799, Napoleon struck first. With 13,000 men, he marched across the Sinai toward Palestine. On March 2nd, his troops captured El Orish. Then Gaza, bloody sieges unfolded. Jaffa fell in horror. Thousands were massacred. 3,000 prisoners were executed on Napoleon's orders. Soon, plague ravaged his troops. Napoleon visited the sick. This dangerous mission was spun into legend. Then, Acre resisted. British ships supplied the city and frustrated French assaults. For 2 months, every attack failed. The year is 1799. The place is the Levant. The French are losing badly against the Ottoman Empire. Napoleon's army is dying of disease. His campaign in Egypt has become a disaster. To turn the tide, he needs a victory. He needs it desperately. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign began so promisingly. In July 1798, he landed near Alexandria with 18,000 troops. After a brilliant coup, he had toppled the ruling Mamluk dynasty and installed himself as the new ruler of Egypt. In the south, the French advanced into the Sudan. But in the north, rebellions broke out. The Mamluk survivors formed an army and marched on Cairo. Napoleon raced south to save the city. At the Battle of the Pyramids, his cannons smashed the rebels. It was a great victory, but it left him hated by the Egyptian people. Then came the plague, carried by rats from the crowded ships of the British Navy. First, the soldiers and officers died. Then, Cairo's population perished too. Whole families were wiped out. By the end, 25% of the city's population had been killed. Desperate to end the bloodshed, Napoleon made peace with the sheiks. He introduced reforms, reorganizing the army and ending the plague outbreaks. He even freed the slaves. But this uneasy peace did not last long. The Ottomans were coming. In 1799, Napoleon had only 13,000 fit soldiers, but he knew that his army could not fight the Ottomans in Egypt. He had to strike first. His goal was clear: conquer Syria and Palestine, or at least destroy enough Ottoman troops to stop their advance. His enemies, the Ottoman Sultan and his generals, were confident. They believed the French were finished. They had made a terrible mistake, underestimating Napoleon. He started his campaign with a forced march across the Sinai Desert. His troops seized El Arish, then pushed on to Gaza. Both places fell after brief sieges. But now Napoleon's soldiers faced a major obstacle: the city of Jaffa. It was strongly fortified and well defended by Ottoman troops. So Napoleon ordered his artillery to pound the city day and night. When the bombardment ended, 20,000 terrified inhabitants fled into the hills. The French entered Jaffa to find the place a horror. Homes were burnt and destroyed. The streets were littered with corpses. Many of the defenders had fled, but others fought back. With saber and musket, the French struggled to contain the city. On April 8th, fighting broke out again. Napoleon's troops attacked house to house, killing every defender they met. When it was over, 3,000 civilians and 400 Ottoman soldiers were dead. The French losses were much smaller. Impressed by their tenacity, Napoleon ordered the surviving defenders released. But the next day, 300 of them tried to escape. The general had them shot. In total, more than 5,000 people were killed in the fighting around Jaffa. Most were civilians. But the worst was yet to come. As the French army advanced, thousands of Jaffa's inhabitants died of plague, cholera, and dysentery. Some say that plague came to Jaffa with Napoleon. Now it raged through his troops. No one was safe. Even Napoleon's young son could not escape its grasp. One evening, his wife Josephine wrote to her sister, "The child is very ill. Our dear little boy looks as if he were dead. His temperature is 105 degrees. We are giving him up. May God have him in his keeping." Soon, the little boy was dead. The same fate would befall many more. 20% of Napoleon's soldiers would die of disease before the campaign was over. Yet, in spite of this, Napoleon pressed his attack. His troops marched on Acre, a fortified city on the Mediterranean coast. Here, the British naval squadron anchored just offshore. Every day, they brought in fresh troops and supplies. For Napoleon, this was a disaster. He needed a victory, but his troops were worn out, and still he kept attacking. Every assault failed. For 2 months, the French attacked the seemingly invincible city. The siege of Acre was a stalemate. Then something remarkable happened. Napoleon caught cholera. Maybe it was the same disease that killed his son. What we know for sure is that Napoleon visited the sick and dying soldiers, often putting himself in danger. He developed a reputation as a fearless leader, willing to sacrifice anything to save his men. But in reality, he might have had no choice. There was no cure for cholera. The only treatment was to leave the infected alone and hope for the best. Now, gravely ill himself, Napoleon prepared for death. But he would survive. The cholera would eventually kill 20% of his soldiers, but it spared him. By late July, he was well enough to direct his troops once more. The French were on the march again, moving deeper into Syria. Their goal was Damascus, but they never got there. Moving forward will be more interest. Be ready. At Mount Tabor, Napoleon has won an astonishing victory. With fewer than 4,000 troops, over the next 4 months, Napoleon's army marches through the desert, plagued by heat, thirst, and disease. Of the 4,500 men he'll lose during this campaign, 3,000 will be to sickness. By July, his force is reduced to just 2,000 combat-effective troops. On the march, he orders plague victims given laudanum, a drug that induces a deep sleep from which they rarely wake. Reaching Alexandria on July 1799, Napoleon learns that the Ottomans have taken over a dozen coastal towns. To save his army, he decides to sail back to France, leaving behind him a shattered and demoralized force. Napoleon takes with him the bitter taste of defeat and the knowledge that his name is made dirt. In Cairo, his triumphs are staged, his victories exaggerated. Murat captures the commander himself, wounded but victorious. A second French triumph in as many days. Napoleon's reputation is restored. But on August 23rd, a courier arrives with news from Europe. Austria, Russia, and Britain have formed a new coalition and are marching on France. Napoleon knows his place is not in Egypt, but in Paris. That night, he secretly sails for home. Command in Egypt passes to General, who stays in the Levant for another 2 years, fighting, losing, and dying to a dagger in Cairo. The Egyptian expedition is over. France's fleet is gone and its aims are unrealized. Yet one discovery endures. The Rosetta Stone, plundered by the British, it becomes the key to ancient hieroglyphs. Modern Egyptology is born. Napoleon's adventure brought glory, horror, and science. For France, it was costly failure. For Napoleon, a stepping stone to power. He returned to Paris in 1799, not defeated, but destined for greatness. The Egyptian campaign was only the beginning. Next time, I'll tell you more stories on the Napoleonic Wars. Please stand by. See you later, and thanks for watching.